My wife stepped out on me with some guy she thought was better than I'd ever be, and our daughters sided with her, right up until everything blew up in their faces and their little world caved in. I'm a 38-year-old guy, and I spent 15 years married to Vanessa, who's 36. We have a daughter named Zoe. She's 19 now. This is going to be a long story, so you might as well crack open a cold beer and settle in. Vanessa and I first crossed paths back in our junior year of college. I was buried up to my neck in an engineering program, surviving mostly on cheap ramen and those canned energy drinks that taste like battery acid. She was working toward her education degree, and for some reason, she found me interesting, even though I was basically a half-dead zombie most days. We hit it off almost immediately. She was the outgoing, put-together type, and she'd actually laugh at my awful jokes. Meanwhile, I was more of a quiet guy who liked to plan everything out in advance. But somehow, we balanced each other out. After we graduated, we tied the knot at this small venue, probably 50 people tops. Her folks chipped in a little bit, but Vanessa and I paid for most of the wedding ourselves, since my parents weren't exactly swimming in cash. 2 years later, Zoe was born. Honestly, the timing couldn't have been better. Vanessa had just wrapped up her teaching credential, and I'd gotten my first real engineering job downtown. The pay wasn't bad for a beginner, around 48 grand a year, but the hours were a nightmare. It wasn't unusual for me to work 60 or 70 hours a week. Some nights, I wouldn't get home until 2 in the morning if we were under a deadline. Vanessa and I had a long talk and agreed she'd stay home with Zoe rather than pay for daycare. It just made sense money-wise, since most of her teaching salary would have gone straight to childcare anyway, and we both felt better having her at home. Those early years were rough, but honestly pretty good. We bought this tiny starter house in a decent school district. Nothing special, 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, definitely needed some fixing up, but it was ours. I dragged myself home, completely wiped out, and Vanessa would have dinner ready for me. She'd let me chill for about 30 minutes, then she'd hand me baby Zoe so I could get my dad time in while she cleaned up the kitchen. On weekends, I'd take care of Zoe so Vanessa could get a break, and we'd knock out house projects together during nap time. I worked my ass off at that firm, took on every crap assignment nobody else wanted, even volunteered for holiday shifts when they needed someone. Little by little, the promotions started to roll in. I moved up from junior engineer to project engineer, then team lead, and finally project manager. By the 8th year of our marriage, I'd more than doubled my income to about $110,000. That raise meant we could finally upgrade to a nicer house in a better neighborhood. It wasn't anything flashy, but it was a real step up. For bedrooms, a yard where Zoe could play, and good schools right around the corner. I'll never forget the day we closed on that place. Vanessa was crying happy tears, telling me how proud she was of all the long hours and sacrifices I'd made. We started dreaming out loud about the future, how we'd pay off the mortgage early, maybe buy a little vacation cabin one day, and help Zoe through college so she wouldn't be buried in student debt like we had been. That day, I felt like I'd finally become the man I always wanted to be, giving my family the security my dad could never provide. Back then, Zoe was completely glued to me. Even though I worked insane hours, I always carved out time for her. She'd sit by the front window, watching for my headlights, even if I didn't pull in until 9 at night. Weekends were just for us. I taught her how to fish at this little pond down the road and showed her how to change a flat tire when she was only 10. Her tiny hands were perfect for getting to those hard-to-reach lug nuts. I helped her with math homework and spent 3 years in a row doing science fair projects together. We built these volcano models that actually erupted. Every single one of them won first place. I'm not going to pretend our marriage was perfect. We argued, sure. There were plenty of times I missed important events because I was buried at work. Vanessa would get angry that I was checked out or never around, but somehow we always patched things up. At least, that's what I believed. Looking back now, I can see I was way more absent than I ever admitted. When you're clocking 12 or 14-hour days, you don't have a lot of energy left to connect. But I honestly thought Vanessa understood that I was busting my ass for us, not because I wanted to skip dance recitals or family dinners. I assumed we had this unspoken understanding. I'd handle the money, the house, the college fund, all the big picture stuff. She'd take care of the emotional side, making our place feel like a home I wanted to come back to. That arrangement worked for almost 15 years. I really thought we were solid. Man, I couldn't have been more wrong. The first clue that something wasn't right showed up about 8 months ago. Now that I think about it, I'm sure there were hints before then, but I was too busy grinding at work to see them. By then, I'd become a senior project manager, pulling in around 135 grand, still putting in 60-hour weeks. I was gunning for a director role that would bump my pay to about $175,000. That extra money would have completely covered Zoe's college tuition and finally given us some breathing room to save for retirement. Then I started noticing Vanessa getting all dolled up for the simplest errands. Full makeup, perfect hair, brand new outfits just to run to Target or grab groceries. At first, I figured, hey, good for her. She's taking care of herself. But after a while, it started to feel off. She'd leave the house around 10 in the morning, saying she was going grocery shopping, and wouldn't come back until 3 in the afternoon with maybe a single bag of food. Or she'd tell me she was grabbing coffee with a friend, and somehow that turned into 5 hours gone. Her whole routine shifted overnight. Suddenly, her yoga classes that used to last about an hour were stretching into 3-hour marathons. Book club, which used to be this once-a-month thing, was now happening every single week, and the meetings would drag on from 7 at night until midnight. Girls' nights out went from maybe once a month to twice a week. I didn't dwell on it much because I was buried under a mountain of overtime, trying to wrap up this massive project that would pretty much lock in my promotion. But the money situation started looking shady real fast. I'd open up our credit card statements and see all these charges at restaurants in parts of town she always claimed she never set foot in. One time, I asked her about a $120 tab at a steakhouse downtown, and she brushed it off, saying it must have been an error or maybe she was there for Jessica's birthday dinner. Then, sure enough, I'd see photos on Jessica's Instagram that same day, showing her at some totally different place. Her shopping habits were getting way out of hand too. She'd blow $500 at Nordstrom, but I never saw any new clothes show up in the closet. Weekend girls' trips that used to happen maybe once a year were popping up every couple of months, each trip costing $1,000 or more. Whenever I tried to talk about the spending, she'd get all defensive, accusing me of trying to control her or acting like I didn't want her to have any fun just because I was always working. Classic Darvo, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. I'd usually back off, telling myself it wasn't worth the argument since, technically, we could afford it. I mean, I was making good money, but even so, the whole thing felt shady as hell. Zoe's attitude started changing too, almost like someone flipped a switch. This was the same kid who used to wait by the window for me to get home, and now she couldn't even bother to look up from her phone when I walked in. She got super tight with Vanessa, sharing these little glances like they had some private joke I wasn't in on. She started throwing out comments like, must be nice to rake in so much cash or dad's never home anyway, so who cares what he thinks. The entitlement was off the charts. Zoe began expecting all this expensive stuff, designer clothes, the newest iPhone the day it came out, concert tickets that cost hundreds of dollars. When I suggested she pick up a part-time weekend job, like I did back in college, Vanessa would immediately shoot it down. She'd say she needs to concentrate on school. We don't want her to struggle the way we did. Somehow, I ended up painted as the villain just for thinking a 19-year-old should learn some basic work ethic. Meanwhile, my credit card bills were showing Zoe spending $100 at Sephora or dropping $300 at fancy restaurants I'd never even heard of. Their stories started getting tangled up too. Vanessa would say they'd spent the day shopping, but then Zoe would slip up and mention some restaurant by the lake. They started having these hushed conversations that would immediately stop the second I walked into the room. I noticed all of this, every red flag, but I kept telling myself I was overthinking it, or that it was just regular mother-daughter bonding. After 15 years together, you're supposed to trust your wife, right? Besides, I was so laser-focused on clinching that promotion that I didn't have the mental energy left to connect all the dots. Turned out that was a huge mistake. Everything fell apart about 3 months ago. That morning, I'd been fighting off one of the worst migraines of my life. My team had finally finished the big project I'd been killing myself over, so my boss told me to take the rest of the day off and get some rest. It was the first time in probably 2 years that I'd left the office early. I didn't even bother texting Vanessa to let her know I was coming home, partly because my head felt like it was splitting open, and partly because I just assumed she was out somewhere, spending money as usual. I pulled into the driveway around 1 in the afternoon. All I wanted to do was go upstairs, pop some meds, and crash. But as I started heading up the stairs, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. I was about to call out when I heard my name. Dad has no freaking idea, Zoe said, laughing. He's basically just an ATM with legs at this point. I stopped dead in the hallway. What in the actual hell was I hearing? Honestly, I stopped feeling guilty months ago, Vanessa replied, her voice cold as ice. Derek's getting impatient, though. Once you graduate, we're done here. My stomach dropped right out from under me. Derek? Done here? What the hell was going on? God, Derek is so much better than Dad, Zoe went on. Like, actually fun instead of just working all the time. What a chump your dad is, Vanessa said, and the way she laughed made my blood turn to ice. Almost a year of this, and the idiot still hasn't noticed a thing. Too busy making money for us to blow. Derek said we could stay at his lake house next month, Zoe added. Dad won't even notice we're gone. Not if he keeps working himself to death for us, Vanessa said. Best sucker ever. I stood there, completely frozen, like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water down my spine. She'd leave the house around 10 in the morning, saying she was going grocery shopping, and wouldn't come back until 3 in the afternoon with maybe a single bag of food. Or she'd tell me she was grabbing coffee with a friend, and somehow that turned into 5 hours gone. Her whole routine shifted overnight. Suddenly, her yoga classes that used to last about an hour were stretching into 3-hour marathons. Book club, which used to be this once-a-month thing, was now happening every single week, and the meetings would drag on from 7 at night until midnight. Girls' nights out went from maybe once a month to twice a week. I didn't dwell on it much because I was buried under a mountain of overtime, trying to wrap up this massive project that would pretty much lock in my promotion. But the money situation started looking shady real fast. I'd open up our credit card statements and see all these charges at restaurants in parts of town she always claimed she never set foot in. One time, I asked her about a $120 tab at a steakhouse downtown, and she brushed it off, saying it must have been an error or maybe she was there for Jessica's birthday dinner. Then, sure enough, I'd see photos on Jessica's Instagram that same day, showing her at some totally different place. Her shopping habits were getting way out of hand too. She'd blow $500 at Nordstrom, but I never saw any new clothes show up in the closet. Weekend girls' trips that used to happen maybe once a year were popping up every couple of months, each trip costing $1,000 or more. Whenever I tried to talk about the spending, she'd get all defensive, accusing me of trying to control her or acting like I didn't want her to have any fun just because I was always working. Classic Darvo, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. I'd usually back off, telling myself it wasn't worth the argument since, technically, we could afford it. I mean, I was making good money, but even so, the whole thing felt shady as hell. Zoe's attitude started changing too, almost like someone flipped a switch. This was the same kid who used to wait by the window for me to get home, and now she couldn't even bother to look up from her phone when I walked in. She got super tight with Vanessa, sharing these little glances like they had some private joke I wasn't in on. She started throwing out comments like, must be nice to rake in so much cash or dad's never home anyway, so who cares what he thinks? The entitlement was off the charts. Zoe began expecting all this expensive stuff, designer clothes, the newest iPhone the day it came out, concert tickets that cost hundreds of dollars. When I suggested she pick up a part-time weekend job, like I did back in college, Vanessa would immediately shoot it down. She'd say she needs to concentrate on school. We don't want her to struggle the way we did. Somehow, I ended up painted as the villain just for thinking a 19-year-old should learn some basic work ethic. Meanwhile, my credit card bills were showing Zoe spending $100 at Sephora or dropping $300 at fancy restaurants I'd never even heard of. Their stories started getting tangled up too. Vanessa would say they'd spent the day shopping, but then Zoe would slip up and mention some restaurant by the lake. They started having these hushed conversations that would immediately stop the second I walked into the room. I noticed all of this, every red flag, but I kept telling myself I was overthinking it, or that it was just regular mother-daughter bonding. After 15 years together, you're supposed to trust your wife, right? Besides, I was so laser-focused on clinching that promotion that I didn't have the mental energy left to connect all the dots. Turned out that was a huge mistake. Everything fell apart about 3 months ago. That morning, I'd been fighting off one of the worst migraines of my life. My team had finally finished the big project I'd been killing myself over, so my boss told me to take the rest of the day off and get some rest. It was the first time in probably 2 years that I'd left the office early. I didn't even bother texting Vanessa to let her know I was coming home, partly because my head felt like it was splitting open, and partly because I just assumed she was out somewhere, spending money as usual. I pulled into the driveway around 1 in the afternoon. All I wanted to do was go upstairs, pop some meds, and crash. But as I started heading up the stairs, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. I was about to call out when I heard my name. Dad has no freaking idea, Zoe said, laughing. He's basically just an ATM with legs at this point. I stopped dead in the hallway. What in the actual hell was I hearing? Honestly, I stopped feeling guilty months ago, Vanessa replied, her voice cold as ice. Derek's getting impatient, though. Once you graduate, we're done here. My stomach dropped right out from under me. Derek? Done here? What the hell was going on? God, Derek is so much better than Dad, Zoe went on. Like, actually fun instead of just working all the time. What a chump your dad is, Vanessa said, and the way she laughed made my blood turn to ice. Almost a year of this, and the idiot still hasn't noticed a thing. Too busy making money for us to blow. Derek said we could stay at his lake house next month, Zoe added. Dad won't even notice we're gone. Not if he keeps working himself to death for us, Vanessa said. Best sucker ever. I stood there, completely frozen, like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water down my spine. 15 years of marriage and 19 years of being a dad. All those endless 60 and 70-hour work weeks, the missed holidays, the constant stress and sacrifice, it all got boiled down to me being their personal ATM. The two people I'd given everything for were literally sitting there, laughing behind my back. It felt like somebody had driven a steel rod straight through my chest. That migraine I'd been fighting all morning suddenly felt like nothing compared to the pain in my gut. I'd spent nearly 2 decades busting my ass to give them a good life, and in return, they were mocking me and scheming to walk away the minute they'd wrung every last drop out of me. And who the hell was Derek, anyway? Some guy my wife had apparently been sneaking around with for almost a year, while I was working late nights to bankroll her shopping binges and my daughter's college tuition. The same college where, apparently, she was picking up lessons on how to be a gold-digging backstabber, just like her mom. All those weekends I'd hauled myself into the office to catch up. All those miserable client dinners I'd sat through to lock down contracts that secured our future, all of it was for this. They just kept talking, laying out every detail of their plan. How they were going to wait until I'd paid the last of Zoe's tuition before Vanessa would finally pull the trigger and file for divorce. How they'd already met with some divorce attorney who told Vanessa she could probably snag half my retirement account and maybe even the house. How Derek had a boat and a lake house and would take them on little getaways while they told me they were visiting Vanessa's sister or something. I couldn't even recognize them anymore. My wife, the woman I'd shared a bed with for 15 years, and my daughter, the kid I'd taught to ride a bike and stayed up with when she had the flu, both of them were just strangers wearing familiar faces, laughing about how clueless I was. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, and slipped out the front door without making a sound. They were so caught up in their little conspiracy, they didn't even notice the door closing behind me. I climbed into my car and just sat there, staring at the steering wheel. I didn't need any more proof after what I'd heard. I drove straight to the office of a divorce attorney a buddy of mine had used a couple years back. I called from the parking lot, basically begging for an emergency appointment. The lawyer sounded surprised by how certain I was. Most guys, he said, come in wavering, unsure if they're ready to pull the plug. Not me. When you hear your own kid call you an ATM with legs while your wife cackles about what a sucker you are, there's nothing left to talk about. By 4:30 that same day, I'd officially filed for divorce. I signed all the paperwork, handed over a $5,000 retainer straight from my personal account, and walked out with a detailed plan for what to do next. My lawyer didn't try to milk me for extra billable hours, either. He just gave me clear instructions on how to protect myself. First on the list was locking down my finances. I spent the next week going through everything, step by step. I opened new bank accounts at a place neither Vanessa nor I had ever used, transferred almost all our savings into my own account, and left about $2,000 in the joint account so it wouldn't immediately raise red flags. I called all 4 credit card companies, reported the cards as compromised, and had replacements sent to my office instead of the house. I put tight spending limits on the only joint card I kept active, $500 max, enough for groceries and essentials, but nowhere near enough for Vanessa's shopping sprees. I redirected my paycheck deposits into the new account, called up my 401k provider, and added extra security measures and verification questions. I made a full inventory of all our assets, snapped photos of everything valuable in the house, copied every bank statement I could find, and downloaded records showing Vanessa's year-long spree of blowing through our money. Turns out she'd been skimming money out of our joint account into some secret stash I hadn't known about. Nearly $30,000 gone. When I showed the records to my lawyer, he just shook his head and said, "She's been laying the groundwork to bail on your dime. Judges don't look kindly on that." The hardest part was coming home every night and pretending nothing had changed. I'd sit there at dinner, listening to Vanessa go on about her day. Yoga was so intense today. Yeah, sure, 3-hour yoga. I'd watch Zoe texting under the table, both of them completely oblivious that I knew exactly what they were up to. I'd smile, nod in the right places, ask about their plans for the weekend. Hell, I even signed off on another expensive shopping trip for Zoe, knowing it'd be the last time I'd ever foot the bill. They didn't notice a thing. I was still the same dependable dad and husband in their eyes, too focused on work to see what was happening right in front of me. At the office, I started quietly getting my affairs in order. I talked to my boss about taking some personal days soon, just in case the divorce turned ugly and bled into my work life. I started documenting all my projects and making handoff plans in case I needed to step away. My boss could tell something was off, but didn't press me. He just said to take all the time I needed. I also took a deep dive into our mortgage and loan documents. Turned out the house was in better shape than I thought. I'd bought it before we got married and had made every payment from my own income, so my lawyer was pretty confident I'd be able to keep it. Both cars were paid off, but mine was in my name alone, while hers was listed as joint property, another detail to sort out later. After a full week of preparing, I was finally ready. I waited until after dinner on a Friday night, when I knew they'd both be home. Zoe had come back from college for the weekend, supposedly to do laundry, though I figured she was really there to ask for more money. I called them both into the living room, turned off the TV, and sat across from them like we were about to talk vacation plans or something. 15 years of marriage was about to come to an end. I was finally taking back control of my life from the people who'd been playing me like a fool for God knows how long. So I leaned back in my chair and said it real casual, almost like I was about to talk about the weather. Filed for divorce last week, I told them. Figured you ought to know. The look on Vanessa's face was something I'll never forget. First, pure shock. Then, confusion. And finally, the panic set in. Zoe froze mid-text, her thumbs dangling over her phone screen like she'd forgotten how to use them. You could have sliced the silence in that room with a steak knife. You what? Vanessa managed to croak out. I kicked my feet out and relaxed in my seat. Divorce, I said, calm as could be. You know, that thing that happens when your wife spends a year screwing around with some guy while your daughter cheers her on. Vanessa went as white as the walls. Zoe looked like she was about to be sick. I don't know what you're. Vanessa began, her voice shaky. I cut her off with a laugh that probably sounded a little crazy. Save it, I told her. Seriously, I heard you two in the kitchen last week, talking about how I'm just an ATM with legs. About how Derek is so much better than boring old dad. About how you're going to leave as soon as Zoe graduates. Real inspiring stuff. Dad, Zoe started to say, but I held up a hand. Not done, I told her. My voice wasn't loud, wasn't even angry anymore. Just tired. The thing about conspiracies, I went on, is they're pretty damn hard to keep secret when you're living under the same roof. So here's how this is going to play out, I continued, keeping my voice steady. The divorce is filed. It's already in motion. You don't get a say in that. I've moved the majority of our assets into accounts you can't touch. But don't worry, I added. I left $2,000 in the joint account. That should cover, what? Maybe 2 weeks of your usual spending. What? But you can't just. Vanessa stammered, her eyes darting around like she was searching for an escape hatch. Actually, I said, leaning forward with a smile, I can. And I already did. And before you launch into your speech about how I work too much, or how I'm never emotionally available, or whatever prepared monologue you've got queued up, don't bother. You decided to cheat instead of talking to me. That's on you. The air in the room felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Zoe, probably realizing her college fund was about to take a serious hit, tried a different angle. You're overreacting, she said, her voice dripping with teenage defiance. Mom deserves to be happy. Derek is. I held up a finger and cut her off. I don't care about Derek, I said flatly. This isn't about him. It's about respect and honesty. 2 things neither of you seem to understand. Vanessa was crying now. A week ago, her tears would have ripped my heart out. Now, they just looked like part of the act. What do you want me to say? She sobbed. That I messed up? Fine, I screwed up. You're right about one thing, I told her, voice calm. I was too wrapped up in work. I was too focused on providing and not paying attention to what was happening right here in my own house. My mistake. I've learned from it. Then I laid it all out, plain and simple. My lawyer had already walked me through how everything would probably shake out. The house would likely stay with me, since I'd bought it before the marriage and made every payment from my income. The vacation property we bought 5 years ago might be contested, but given all the records showing Vanessa siphoning off money, there was a good chance I'd keep that too. Our cars would stay separate, mine in my name, hers in both. Another thing to work out later. The retirement accounts would be the big battlefield. But even there, my lawyer was confident we could limit the damage. You can't just cut us off, Zoe shouted suddenly, her face red. What about my senior trip? What about my tuition next semester? I looked at her for a long moment, feeling something between sadness and disgust. This was the same kid who used to wrap herself in my old college sweatshirts because they smelled like me. Now she was just another entitled voice demanding more. Actions have consequences, I said evenly. You call me a wallet. Well, congratulations, you just found out wallets can close. You want extra money? Get a job. I did when I was your age. Vanessa switched tactics then, trading tears for bargaining. This isn't fair to Zoe, she pleaded. She's just a kid. She shouldn't have to suffer because of us. I actually let out a small laugh at that. She's 19, I reminded her. Old enough to laugh about me behind my back. Old enough to keep your affair a secret. Old enough to plan your escape on my dime. And definitely old enough to learn that choices have consequences. The rest of the evening blurred together, shouting, crying, pathetic attempts to guilt me into backing down. Zoe stormed off to her room, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. Vanessa kept trying every angle, rage, tears, guilt trips, but none of it landed. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Despite everything that had happened, I felt at peace for the first time in a long time. More than that, I finally felt like I was steering my own life again. The next few weeks were tense as hell. We settled into this weird, uncomfortable routine in the house. I started working longer hours again, not because I had to, but because it meant I didn't have to be there. When I was home, Vanessa would switch between teary apologies and dead silence, depending on which tactic she thought might work that day. Zoe went full teenage meltdown, slamming doors and glaring at me like I was the villain in her personal soap opera. I stayed firm on the finances. Zoe completely lost it when her card got declined trying to buy a $400 prom dress. She stormed into my home office while I was on a call, yelling loud enough for my coworkers to hear. This is bullshit, she screamed. How am I supposed to go to formal now? I didn't even look up from my screen. You could get a weekend job at the mall, I told her. I hear the food court is always hiring. She mumbled something under her breath and stomped away. I just turned back to my spreadsheet, feeling more certain than ever that I'd made the right call. I realized something strange as all this played out. I didn't even feel upset anymore. It's wild how fast someone can turn into a total stranger. The divorce process moved forward like clockwork. Vanessa went out and hired her own lawyer, some woman who specialized in getting women what they deserve. Her first move was to file a counter-petition, claiming she was entitled to more money because of her years of unpaid domestic work and my so-called emotional neglect. She tried to paint herself as this long-suffering housewife who'd been left to raise our daughter all alone while I was off chasing paychecks. I didn't so much as blink. My lawyer was a shark, and he'd already lined everything up, proof of the affair, the missing money, the whole ugly story. We'd pulled months of messages between her and Derek right out of our shared iCloud account, plus emails that spelled everything out, her siphoning money, that hidden bank account. 2 days after Vanessa filed her counterpetition, the judge tossed out most of her claims because of all the evidence we had on her cheating and financial misconduct. I kept the house, just like my lawyer predicted. I kept my car and most of my 401k, minus a smaller settlement than I'd expected, and I held on to the vacation property too. The judge ruled I'd paid for it with separate income, not marital funds. Vanessa ended up with her car and a modest slice of the savings. Worked out fine for me. About 3 weeks in, Vanessa and Zoe were still living in the house because getting everything settled and scheduling the preliminary hearing takes time. That's when reality finally started to sink in for both of them. Funny how Derek was suddenly too busy to see Vanessa once she didn't have full access to my bank account anymore. She'd call him, sometimes in tears, and he'd feed her excuses about work or family obligations. I didn't go out of my way to listen, but the house isn't that big, and she wasn't exactly quiet when she was begging him on the phone. One night, I heard her practically pleading with him to meet up because she needed someone. He told her he needed some space to think about things, which was code for I'm off to find another sugar mama. Zoe's friends started pulling away too. Turns out when you're not the one paying for shopping sprees and fancy dinners, a lot of those friendships dry up fast. She came home early from a weekend with them, clearly upset. Later, I overheard her venting on the phone, complaining that her friends had gone to some pricey restaurant and a concert she couldn't afford. They didn't even offer to cover me, she whined. Like, they know my situation. They know Dad cut me off. Welcome to the reality of real friendship, kid. When the gravy train stops, you find out who actually cares about you. I didn't rub it in. I just let natural consequences do their thing. When Vanessa ran out of grocery money because she'd wasted it all trying to keep Derek interested, I went out and bought the basics myself. When Zoe needed cash for a legitimate school field trip, I paid the school directly. But I wasn't going to fund the lifestyle that had bred so much entitlement and disrespect. The strangest part was how fast my own life started getting better. I landed that director promotion at work, partly because I was sharper and more focused since the big blow-up. Turns out that boring, dependable father routine pays off. Something about setting boundaries at home makes it easier to enforce them everywhere else. My blood pressure dropped by 20 points. I started sleeping better than I had in years. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with because I'd spent all my time working to keep Vanessa's spending habit afloat. My buddy and I started playing basketball again on weekends. I even joined a Saturday hiking group, something I never had the time or energy for before. Little by little, Vanessa and Zoe started changing too. Vanessa finally started looking for work, updating her old teaching resume, even called her former principal to ask about openings. Zoe applied for a part-time job at the mall without me having to nag her. I even caught her browsing cheaper state college websites one night. A pretty big shift from the fancy private university I'd been paying for. They were adapting to the new reality, whether they liked it or not. And me? Well, it wasn't my responsibility anymore. About 2 months into the process, the judge signed off on me keeping the house in the preliminary hearing. That meant Vanessa and Zoe had to move out. I gave them a week to pack up their essentials. They ended up finding this cramped little apartment across town that Vanessa could just barely afford with her new part-time receptionist gig at a dental office. Moving day was surreal. I hired a small moving crew to help them out because, despite everything, I didn't want to be a total jerk about it. I stood there in the driveway, watching the movers load up furniture we'd picked out together, boxes full of photos from happier times, all of it heading out. I didn't feel sad, exactly. It was more like I was watching a movie about someone else's life falling apart. Years of my life, gone. Traded for what? Some random guy? Well, that was their loss to live with. Zoe barely spoke to me the whole day. She did the cold shoulder thing, like I was the villain in her little drama. Vanessa kept trying the same teary routine, coming up with reasons to pull me aside. Are you sure this is what you want? She asked, voice all shaky. We could still fix this, she tried. And my personal favorite, what am I supposed to do now? Like it was somehow my job to figure out her next steps after she spent a year lying and planning to leave me. I kept my answers short, stuck to practical details, didn't engage. By the end of the day, they were gone. I'd be lying if I said the first couple of nights were easy. The house felt too quiet, too empty. But after a few days, I started reclaiming my own space. I moved back into the master bedroom, which I'd abandoned during that last awkward stretch of coexisting. I turned Zoe's old room into a proper home office. I converted the formal dining room Vanessa always insisted on, but we never actually used, into a home gym. I started grilling dinner on weeknights just because I felt like it. I bought a big new TV for the living room, the kind Vanessa always claimed would ruin her decor. I even went down to the local shelter and adopted a goofy lab mix named Charlie, who follows me around like I'm the greatest thing on earth. Work kept improving, too. I was getting home by 6 most nights, and the promotion came with a nice pay bump. Money I finally had time to enjoy. About 2 weeks after they moved out, I was in the kitchen making dinner when my phone started ringing. It was Zoe. I almost hit decline on the call, but curiosity got the better of me. Zoe sounded like she'd been crying nonstop for hours. She dropped this little bombshell that Derek had ghosted her mom completely as soon as he figured out there wasn't some big divorce settlement headed their way. He blocked her number and everything. Classic. I was just standing in my kitchen, flipping through bills, listening to this mess, and I couldn't help but smile. Was I supposed to feel sorry that the same guy who helped blow up my marriage turned out to be a gold digger? Life has a funny way of evening the score. Vanessa was apparently falling apart over it, and Zoe actually sounded shocked that I didn't immediately jump in to comfort them. There was this long, awkward pause, and then Zoe mumbled something about how they didn't think. Yeah, exactly the problem. Not thinking. I won't lie, there was a certain satisfaction in watching karma come back around in 4K. She hung up after that. Haven't heard from her since. It's been 6 months since the divorce was finalized, and my life has completely flipped for the better. I'm down 30 pounds, thanks to hitting the gym 4 times a week. Financially, it's night and day. With only myself to take care of, I'm saving more than ever. The house doesn't even look the same anymore. I finally renovated the kitchen Vanessa complained about for years. I turned Zoe's old room into a proper home office, triple monitors and everything, perfect for gaming. And every day when I get home, my dog Charlie, my goofy lab mix, goes absolutely nuts like I'm the greatest person alive. Meanwhile, Vanessa and Zoe's lives have completely unraveled. Through mutual friends, I heard Vanessa lost that receptionist job because she kept calling in sick. Now she's working behind the counter at a convenience store. Zoe had to drop out of her fancy private college when the tuition bill hit. What can I say? Karma's a bitch. Then, this morning, I'm minding my business, making coffee, when there's a knock at the door. And there she was, Vanessa, looking like she'd crawled straight out of a dumpster. She hit me with that classic line, "Can we talk?" while trying to peek past me into what used to be her house. I didn't invite her in. I just stood there in the doorway. "We're already talking," I told her. She launched into the whole sob story. How Derek vanished the minute he realized there wasn't a fat payday waiting for him. Real shocker there. How they're stuck in some moldy little apartment. How Zoe had to couch surf with friends. And, of course, all roads led to the pitch I knew was coming. She needed just a little help to get back on her feet. Swore she'd pay me back once she found a better job, which we both knew was code for never. I looked at this woman I'd spent 15 years of my life with, the same one who laughed about me behind my back, who plotted to gut me financially, and I just said, no. Simple as that. She started crying about how they were going to lose the apartment. I told her, that sounds like a you problem, not a me problem. Later that evening, Zoe emailed me this guilt trip about how she missed me and didn't know what to do. For a second, I almost felt something. Remembered all those nights reading her bedtime stories, teaching her how to ride a bike. Then I remembered her voice in the kitchen, laughing about how clueless I was. I hit delete. Look, I've moved on. I've made friends I can actually trust. My buddy Mark asked me the other day if I ever regretted how it all went down. I told him, maybe someday with Zoe, if she truly changes. But Vanessa? That bridge isn't just burned, it's obliterated. Some folks probably think I'm being too harsh, but after 15 years of being used by the people who were supposed to love me most, I finally put myself first. And honestly, I've never been better. I don't feel 1 ounce of guilt about cutting Vanessa off. She made her choices, and she can live with them. As for Zoe, yeah, I've thought about the idea of rebuilding something one day. But she learned this behavior from her mom, and I'm not convinced that's going to change anytime soon. It's harsh, sure, but she crossed a line. She needs to grow up and figure out what she did wrong. And for the people who say I should have tried counseling first, she was sleeping with some other guy for a year, stealing my money, and planning her exit. What exactly was there to talk through? And if you're wondering about Derek, he's not my problem. There are always going to be guys like him sniffing around for a sugar mama. But I never thought my own wife would be dumb enough to fall for it. What can I say? Life has a wicked sense of humor when it comes to proving you wrong.